It is absolutely my pleasure today to introduce tonight's panel, Developing Your Restaurant Workplace Culture, a discussion on the best practices in developing a culture in your organization. We all know that culture is critical to the success of any business, whether it be a school, a technology company, or a restaurant. But we also often think of culture as something that's kind of amorphous, right? How are you building culture when you've got your head down, you're in the weeds, you're running around every day? So as I said, it is my honor to that end to welcome these wonderful panelists and our moderator to help unpack the mysteries of creating a strong company culture and share some stories from their adventures in creating culture at their restaurants. We'll start in the middle. Lynn Ta is the managing partner of All Day Baby, the Spring Lake neighborhood of Los Angeles, and she is the co-founder of Regarding Her, a nonprofit organization devoted to the advancement and achievement, empowerment of women restaurateurs. Over to my right, Ellen Yin has over 25 years of experience as an owner-operator here in Philadelphia, including restaurants like the Incomparable Fork, High Street Philly, A Kitchen and Bar, and High Street Hoagies. Ellen is also the founding member of the Sisterly Love Collective, a nonprofit to elevate the voices of women in the food and beverage space. Eric Williams, who some of us had the pleasure of hearing earlier today, is the chef owner of Chicago's Virtue Restaurant and Bar, Mustard Seed Kitchen, Daisy Po' Boys and Tavern, and Top This Mac and Cheese. Woo, woo, woo. And Hollis Silverman is the former COO of Jose Andres Think Food Group and currently the founder and CEO of Eastern Point Collective, a women-owned and operated restaurant group located in Washington, D.C., which includes the Duck and the Peach, La Colina, and the Wells Cocktail Bar. Last but certainly not least, it is a privilege to turn over the mic to tonight's moderator, an Emmy-winning and James Beard Award-winning TV personality, chef, writer, and social justice advocate, Andrew Zimmern.
Thank you. Big round of applause for sponsors. Often thought of as a dirty word, but I hadn't had an opportunity to meet the folks from Open Table until tonight, and I was telling them that how much great work that company is doing in the nonprofit and NGO space, anywhere that they can. And I'm aligned with many groups and on the board of many groups that have reached out to a lot of companies that say, no, I would like dollars to be spent with us, but I'm not really interested in trying to help those people who are our customers. And you heard a list of sponsors who are all interested in actually helping the people who are their customers, their community. And we often think of big business as being something that is antithetical to even the subject that we're talking about today. It is one of the reasons that we have to have this conversation tonight, actually. Just to put it in a little bit of perspective, for you, when I was coming up, nobody talked about workplace culture. It wasn't a thing. Nobody cared. The idea was, as my father described work to me when I was a teenager and went out at the age of 14, my first job, shucking clams at a restaurant out in the summer community where my family spent their warm weather months. It was to show up, do the best that you could, give 120%, and then come home. And I remember the first time that I didn't feel well and was wondering about calling in or not calling in. I was 14, and I can't remember whether I was actually sick or I just wanted to like party with my friends or whatever it was. I really don't know whether I was being hyper responsible or hyper irresponsible, which is one of my problems. It's a subject for a different day, but my father, who was, part of the greatest generation and, fought in a world war and came back and built a big business in Manhattan, he said to me, nobody at work cares how you feel. They care about what you do. And that was what he had learned growing up in the 30s and 40s. He was born in 1925, right? I mean, it was a different day and time. And now we're sitting here having a conversation about what I think is the most critical and driving force in our industry. And the reason it relates to sponsors, they actually care about it. They're here supporting this, meaning the Philly Chef Conference, because they're supporting these kind of conversations. And I just think that that deserves acknowledgement, and I think it deserves some scene setting there. I was reading the bios of our esteemed panelists, and several of whom I know, a couple I've just met for the first time. But something struck me in Hollis's bio. And I'm gonna chop the second, I'm gonna take it out of context, but it's kind of in context. But there's a comma in the middle. I'm only reading the second half of the sentence. Quote, ... And I really wanted to build a restaurant where people would want to come and work. Everywhere that I go, and in fact, I was at an event last Thursday in New York, and someone got up, Brandon Krastowski, who owns Edwin's in Cleveland, where they take people out of who are coming out of the criminal justice system, those who have been incarcerated or leaving, and do developmental job training with them. And it's very important. I spend time in jail and prison. If you don't, there's a difference for those that haven't done both. And I was really struck by his impassioned plea to everybody about the workforce today. He said, make connections with law enforcement and get into other communities where there are people who will do anything for a job. And his big struggle in talking to him is getting people to kind of stay still, because once unleashed into the work system, they have such incredible impassioned workers. So it's really, really a very complex issue about how we attract employees at a time where a lot of people think there's no one out there who wants to work with us, and also creating a fair and equitable workplace for everyone where everyone can flourish, because that's the secret to good business practices. And I'm thrilled to be able to talk to these four about this, because they're actual doers. One of the things that I want to make sure that we separate tonight, I'd like all of you to sort of take home, is the actual how of this thing. I've done 20 panels like this, and a lot of time we never really get to the how of it, right? And I want to make sure we answer the question for the person out there that says, but how do I afford it? Because it does take money, it does take time, and it does take community building to establish a culture. So let's first find out why that's important. So I mean, we're friends. I'll start with you. You can call me later. You can call me later and complain. Chef, why is it important to establish an actual work culture that's definable, that an employee can point someone towards and explain?
So I think when we look at companies that we may love or not, and we have TED Talks on the why, it proves how important it is in terms of our relationship with our customers, with our demographic, as to why we do a thing. And we know that when we buy an Apple item, that the packaging is weighted. It feels like you're buying something sturdy, even though the item that you're buying is as fragile as it could possibly be. But it creates a mindset the moment you touch it. And we recognize that when we walk into restaurant spaces, that we extend, when we're really at our best, a very concentrated amount of hospitality. And somehow, between the front door and the back door, we get disjointed. And so, how? I think many restaurant operators and restaurateurs have the how, but the concept is, how do we create connective space between the front door and the back door? And we really work hard and work intentionally to treat every single person that walks into our back door the same way that we do the folks that come into the front door. Most restaurants time how long a server has to greet a table. And then we time how long it should take before you offer drinks. Then we time how long the kitchen should take to get your first course down. But if the UPS guy walks in, we don't time how long it takes for us to value their time when they're servicing us. When the mail person, the mail carrier, or when our delivery guy comes in, we feel like, well, I'm paying you to do your job, right? Because I buy produce from you. And we devalue that person's time. And if we devalue the produce guy's time, then how do we treat everyone else, or what signal are we sending to everyone else whose time we're now going to devalue? And so I think part of the process we really, really understand. We just have to spend a little bit more focus or redirect our energy to make sure that landscape feels even.
How do you do that for your employees?
So we start quite literally, that's why it's on the front of my brain, with the UPS guy. Hot days, everybody is excited about cold water. So we make sure that everybody that walks into our building is offered water. We make sure we buy water to have on hand for everybody that delivers us. And amazingly, it goes a long way, because word on the street is a lot of people don't care. So automatically it puts us above the rest of the people that they're servicing. The person that is in care of that task then gets the immediate response. Chefs talk a lot about, we love the fact that we're in open kitchens, or we cook because we get to see the response from our guests right away. But everybody that we come in contact gives us a response, negatively and or positively. So we focus on what the energy is like in the building, and that is the beginning of our culture. Now, I have a restaurant that's named Virtue, and hospitality happens to be a virtue. And so we set the standard from the name to our actions, and we make sure that it's consistent as often as we can. I wouldn't stand here and say that we don't make mistakes, but I will say that we bust our ass every day, making sure that once we make an error, that we recover quickly.
Lynn, when you hear Chef Eric talk about that, and you reflect on your own work and your own businesses, first things that come to mind are what?
It's true, I am reflecting.
He's a powerful speaker.
Yes, well, I think it's the concept of caring and taking care. So that's definitely what Chef Eric was talking about. I mean, I can care all day about 150 covers that might walk through the door, but the truth is I'm not going to take the best care of every single individual, which is why we have employees in the first place. So taking care and getting taken care of is a huge part of, I think, where the root of our workplace culture began. I have one restaurant that I opened first in 2016 called Here's Looking at You. And I have employees that have worked with me from the very first day and to today. And, what we've taught so much about, which is just leading, I guess I just show how much I care about them. They really are the facilitators of what I believe we're all trying to achieve together. So if I can show each individual employee of mine that I care about, the correct spelling of their name, what their nickname is, what their pronouns are, what is it that they actually personally want to achieve, like all of this sort of attention to detail makes people feel seen, heard, valued, and inspired to hopefully take care of then their 8-table section night after night. And I think we've done a pretty good job of doing that. And I love your quote, Hollis, because one of the best pieces of feedback that I ever heard about a guest, why they love dining, what they love about dining at certain restaurants is they like to look at the employees and see how happy they are. So yeah, I think it's about caring and really teaching even this new generation about what is it like to care. And then from there, it just transfers into being taken care of.
You brought up a really great point that sort of sits on top of what Eric was talking about. He referenced it as, we get it in the front and somehow by the time it gets to the back, we forget about it. And you put it as a, we were take care of our guests, but we also have to take care of ourselves, our employees. Are there specific ways at your restaurants that you take care of your employees beyond the wonderful amount of, respectful conversation that you might have, the knowledge that you might gain about an employee, but in terms of like policies where people can point to something and say, hey, I'm getting this here and I don't get that somewhere else, or in the last place that I served or chopped onions?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is really still comes from just a root of curiosity. I really do believe I show my sense of care and my respect for each of them, no matter what their roles are. It has nothing to do with me being an owner. We're all on the same level. I have a lot to learn from all of my employees. So I really believe a sense of curiosity for your employees and, of course, your guests is invaluable. As far as policies, I mean, we have little things like when you arrive, you need to say hi to everybody. You go through the kitchen, you say hello to everybody. We're very patient, flexible. I've high expectations. I can be controlling, but pre-shift meeting. This is one of my favorite times of any day. It's so much about showing up on time, showing up early. In fact, I have 2 restaurants, and the newer one, I was having a punctuality problem because it's a COVID restaurant, and we ended up having to explain to them, if you're showing up on time, you're probably late. So show up early, and nobody shows up late at my first restaurant. It really is a darling restaurant. But yeah, I mean, my policies escape me right now. I don't have anyone to put them.
How do you get people to show up on time?
I think it's having that unfrenzied ability to control your space, and I think they know how much I put into this work, and they all see that it really is a collective effort. So showing up on early, really, we all win, and we all can make these achievements together. And I think even just building the sense of having a desire for achievement is quite special too. I mean, for me, I'm very lucky. I mean, they're all sort of unique butterflies, all of them that work for me. But even at the beginning of an interviewing process, I'm so interested in hearing how an individual sort of sells me their interests, whatever they may be, because I know I can have confidence that they will then share that same level of respect or interest in selling the food, selling the experience, telling the story. I wrote this whole document the other day. We just launched new spring cocktails at All Day Baby, and I have the great privilege of naming them. I enjoy naming things. And I wrote out this whole thing because my staff there is so young, and they're maybe not as experienced as drinkers like myself, I guess. So I wanted them to know the deep history behind even dirty martinis. We always open with a martini, or the brown derby cocktail. They don't know. So I typed all of this out, and then I went back and explained even just the philosophy behind what a menu at All Day Baby has to sort of abide by. It needs to, give you joy. It needs to make bad cocktails good again. It's about day drinking. It's all of these things. And I showed it to a colleague of mine who owns a restaurant, and they were like, oh, is this how you train people? But it's about information. And the fact that, and at that restaurant, they don't see me as often as the other restaurant. And I think, these little 20-something-year-old Gen Zers, I think it meant something to them that I typed up a 5-page document explaining cocktails to them, and meanings and the root and spring and all of that. So information.
It's fascinating because there's so many different aspects to culture. I think that's one of the things that's tough about this topic, right? Is that some people see it as, how many sick days do you give someone? What's your health insurance like? Do you have maternity leave, right? And you're talking about the other side of that that's equally as important, which is this is how I care about you. Right? In the hopes that then they transfer that care, if I'm hearing correctly.
Yeah.
Hollis, tell us about your businesses in light of what you've just heard.
I agree completely with the culture, creating a place where people feel seen, valued, and heard. That is number one. And also in the culture in restaurants, which typically can be pretty rough. I lay it out right up front with people, and we have a couple of what I say, things that we do very differently. Number one, we pay people very differently. We don't encourage tipping, and that is a big piece of our culture. And we have sexual harassment training. We have a no touching policy. You must have consent. And we have a zero drinking policy and zero drugs while you're at work. And those are things that we lay out very clearly from the beginning. And it turns a lot of people off and it turns a lot of people on. So I think it's very important to be very clear about certain things so that you're creating a place where people feel safe and they feel seen, value, and heard. And that is the most important thing.
And then from there?
From there, training. From there, being consistent, walking the walk, talking the talk. We've been put in some situations and you have to react with integrity and grace. And that's what we do.
You're so well spoken. You make that sound really easy. I think that second part. I mean, I'm sure it took a while to come up with your value system, but then once you've come up with it, it's like, okay, here's what it takes to work here.
Yes.
Right.
It's
and boundaries are great. Right.
Yep.
The more boundaries you have, the better. Then everybody knows what the rules are. But that second part, right, is a tricky one.
Holding people accountable.
And you listed 3 or 4 things.
Yes.
But like, because then you're up and running, right? Then they're in the space and working. And then it's about not just your integrity, but at the same time making sure that the machine runs because you're all running businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's challenging. It's also teaching people how to use their voice and being okay with confronting people. So we try to get people very comfortable with saying, hey, we don't do this here. We don't do this here because we're doing things differently, and giving people the tools to hold everyone else accountable because you can't do it on your own. And you very much need everyone to buy in and be on that team. And it is a team.
Does
100%.
that require extra managers, extra folks in the office, so to speak, to help with training and help to bring people who had the right answer, who have earned the job, but need to understand what it's like to do the work part of work culture?
We could probably use 100 more people to do it, to be honest. We opened in the pandemic, so it's been really hands-on and very challenging and the hardest opening I've ever done. But people start to hear, as you were saying, Chef, like word gets around that we do things differently and people are starting to find us. So it really matters. It matters how you treat people and the word starts to spread.
Helene? I can literally see the gears moving inside your head. You've been so successful for so long, and a lot of people don't see the struggle and the effort and the blood, sweat, and tears that it takes to get there. But you've been in this business for a while, and
it's all a facade.
And so I'm wondering, for someone who's as established in the community as you are, you've seen a lot of changes. So for you, it's probably been a lot of internal change as well to sort of go with what is necessary now versus what was necessary a while ago when you first started.
Well, first of all, I think some of you know my story, but I was not a restaurateur before. I never managed a restaurant. I worked as a server and a bartender, and I knew how servers and bartenders felt when they were poorly managed. And so one of the things that I thought to myself from the very beginning is, whatever I do, if I want to be a success, I want to make people feel respected. And so this is a profession. This is something that I'm passionate about. And I think to have a positive culture, you need a couple things. One is you need somebody with passion. You need a mission, and you need to be able to communicate that mission to all the people who are on your team. You need transparency. You need trust, and the whole process of building that, of course, I have fits and starts where, times change. And I think right after the pandemic, I was just like, what? Like, what happened? I don't understand. I had to have translation about how my team was viewing things. And it was really an eye-opening experience to have to rethink all these things, because although it was really important to have this respect all along, what people view as respect was something totally different. And so just listening to your your internal customers, your internal hospitality was so important to being able to turn that situation into a positive one. And of course, if our industry hadn't been so in the shits in 2020, maybe this would be a totally different conversation. But, I always think a third of the people are with you, a third of the people are moving on to something else, and a third of the people maybe just weren't a great fit. So you're always trying to fill a certain number. How do you constantly bring them in and make sure that they are fulfilling all those 5 categories?
How do you do that?
Well, my colleague Avery Janelli is here somewhere. We start with, we have a whole onboarding program. I didn't know what onboarding really was, but we really take the time to meet with every single person in the interview process to make sure that their values align with ours. Then we bring them into an onboarding process that starts with orientation. And that means sitting around with a group of, there she is, of different people from different restaurants and talking about what's important to us and hearing what's important to them as well, so that we can learn something from the conversation about what they're looking for. For example, we have had health insurance since 1998, but nobody ever signed up. Okay, so we started with maybe 35 to 50 employees, and we were up to like 120. And during that time, the number of insured people stayed at I want to say 12 people. So we started thinking to ourselves, well, something's clearly wrong with. Well, we know there's something wrong with the healthcare industry, but there's something clearly wrong that people are saying that they want this benefit, but they're not signing up for it. What's the disconnect? So we started looking at other options, and we found this company called Vitable Health, which is a primary care nurse practitioner model, and it's only $35 a month. So now we have another 14 people in addition to the the stagnant 12 who were originally on there. We have another 14 people who we brought on. We brought on dental insurance, we brought on other things, but all because our team was telling us what was valuable to them.
So it sounds like just listening, right? Which everybody has mentioned. Right?
Listening, absolutely.
You all, everyone has mentioned COVID, and you just said that, who knows what would have happened without COVID. I do remember in the years leading up to it, between, pay equity issues, lack of health insurance, sick leave, maternity leave, mental health awareness, as we saw so many problems with suicide and addiction and alcoholism in our industry. Those numbers were rising up. It was all being talked about. I'm just curious. Short answer is fine. Did COVID accelerate the decision-making process around addressing those? Do you think maybe some of those would have been a little more stagnant, or was that on its way to getting talked about in your business? Eric, we'll start at the end with you.
So it didn't accelerate mine. And I'm going to be a little odd in this conversation. So I started a restaurant really wanting to work with people that I wanted to take care of and that I wanted to take care of me. They were my friends. And we all know that you shouldn't be in business with friends. At least that's what they tell us, right? But the reality is I work with people who are my friends. And then I meet new friends. And then we do more projects with friends. It's some weird shit. And so that being stated, it's centered around this whole space of care. And we really believe that if we could treat the guests as well as we want to treat each other, then we will win, because they'll get it. But if it doesn't start with us, why are we doing this, right? I can't show up at a place every day where I gotta treat you better than I'm treating myself, right? Because that sounds depressing. You talk about mental health care. I mean, the job is toxic. And so, no, the pandemic did not accelerate it. What we identified was we work in an industry where we are fixers. Even the worst of us are driven by adrenaline because we want to create results rapidly. So when someone said, hey, the industry's broken, which we definitely had some problems, then we jumped in with both feet and we responded to that because that's what we're used to doing. We're used to someone saying my steak is overcooked, even when it's not overcooked, and then giving them a new steak that's less cooked than the steak that we cooked right the first time. That's what we do. However, my plumbers, their industry is broken. My electricians, their industry is broken. My IT guys, their industry is definitely broken, right? And so when it comes down to it, industry is broken. And we saw that. You couldn't buy a bed during the pandemic. You couldn't get a delivery guy to show up at the house when the bed actually got to the warehouse. So industry as a whole needed to be revisited. But we took the charge because that's what we do. You create a crisis in the restaurant industry, as crazy as we are, as nuts as we are, as inconsiderate as we always take the charge. So no, I do not believe it started with the pandemic. We've been doing it all the time.
Lynn?
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize.
Let's
No, this is great. I agree with Chef Eric. In my personal businesses, it didn't really accelerate anything because I think we've just been developing this culture all along. I think something that I cherish and also offends me about my restaurants is my bar director pointed this out to me, but anytime people get a job with us, they can definitely get any job they want after us, and that annoyed the shit out of me in 2021 when I couldn't find people because we were getting these like odd fair weather employees that would come and go, and because they're making big decisions for themselves as well. But I think what I appreciate, at least in my small bubble in Los Angeles, is that I do think it is accelerating within other businesses because I can see it and I can tell.
I agree with Lynn and Chef. I think it just needed to change. And it was something that needed to change and was going to change. So it didn't really, the pandemic didn't accelerate it for me. It was the only reason why I wanted to do it myself.
Explain that.
I mean, the restaurant business is insane. So it's crazy and it attracts crazy people, but we love it. So I never wanted to open a restaurant, but if I was going to do it, I wanted to do it to make it better because I love it. And I think more people should be in it.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm sort of sit where Eric does.
Yeah.
I'm the person who's like, yeah, you can shit on us all you want, and you can point out all the holes, but there's no industry that has ever pivoted faster, and I mean that pre-COVID as well, to address an issue when something has needed addressing. I mean, we turn around the QE2 in a tiny little harbor every single day.
I agree. I always tell people restaurants do in a day what businesses do in a year.
Yep.
We make it happen no matter what.
Yep.
So.
Aline?
Well, since 2010, I think people have been telling me that our industry is short-staffed. And so that has been definitely way before the pandemic. And but I think people have had to be more creative because finding those people and taking care of those people has become increasingly more important. And I think the pandemic just made it clear that that everything has to change, and we're still working at it. I hope that we don't lose the momentum of pushing it forward. Like, I love what you're doing with the service charges. I really want to learn about that and be able to figure out a way to make things more equitable because I'd hate to walk away from everything that's happened over the past 2.5 years and just have it be the same.
Oh, I did want to add, I'm not on a service charge model either, as like Ellen's places, but I've always implemented either a 3 or 4% service charge since the opening of Here's Looking at You in 2016, and that always kind of went into the tip pool. It was originally Kitchen Love, and now what I love that I have seen is more restaurants are. A very large percentage is being tipped out to the back of house. That is a big difference that I've heard through all of my peers.
It is a big difference. I'm praying for the day where we'll actually be able to charge on the menu what a plate actually costs to put in front of a customer. That's my, before I die, I would like to.
I would like that too, also before I die.
I would like to see that. I'm really interested in what all of you have to say. Yes.
I have a question. Do you guys have any veteran staff that's been with you for a long time, and do you utilize them as resources to help pass on the culture and the training and kind of put all that kumbaya-ness?
All of them, even folks that haven't been around as veterans. The moment they're hired, they are now representative of the restaurant and our culture and our voice and all of that. But yeah, one of my favorite sort of like veteran experiences that I have is he's only he's a part-time manager. His name is DeMarcus Brooks. He worked with me from the opening of Here's Looking at You as a server. And he was, dare say, a selfish guy. He was selfish about just like money and like the tip out and like all this other stuff. And but he was really interesting. And I always listened to any of the feedback that he gave. And then what I've learned by accident is that he considers me a mentor. So he just told me in passing, like in a one-on-one one time. And he became my GM, and then he has since come back from COVID as my part-time manager, and then he helps me with all my communications. But absolutely, he is better at this than even me, but I taught him patience and flexibility, and working with people can be so challenging and difficult because it's feelings, kind of like what your dad said didn't matter. The restaurant industry, it matters a lot, and they change all the time, even within the span of a service. But I've had such a great privilege of seeing Mark grow and pass this sort of attitude of patience. He's better at even discipline than I am. He's trying to teach me with my personal life right now, building better structure. And I really admire him, and I think that's something that we teach all of our staff to do, is we need to admire each other, be curious about one another, because you never know what you might be missing. And then at the end of the day, I know I joked earlier about it's annoying when people leave our company and they go on and can get any job that they want. It's actually an incredible honor, just because, and I think about this quite seriously every day that they work for us this is what they pass on. And I never want them to feel like they worked at HLA or ADB, and then their new employer, who's probably a friend of mine, is like, how the hell did they get away with working like this for Lynn, So anyway, yes, this is the stuff that I want them to carry with them.
Yes, sir.
Ellen, you brought this up a little bit, but I think any of you guys can speak about this. You mentioned that at any given time, a third of people on your staff are looking to leave, a third of people are really good, and a third of people don't make sense to be there. If that's happening constantly year over year, how do you really maintain that culture? Because that's more or less only a third of people that actually want to be there and are good at any given time.
I think I misspoke on that one, because if that were the case, then I would really be doomed. Although I did count the number of people on our payroll company, and it is a lot. But seriously, I think that that's true for the industry as a whole, and that's the gap that we're trying to fill, is the third who are leaving the industry and the third who maybe aren't sure, because that's has to be refilled post-pandemic. How do we keep them there? Making it starts again with all the things that we talked about, but also making sure that they're happy, having routine one-on-ones and feedback. So we use a graduated tip pool. So we actually have the excuse of every few weeks reviewing with each person how they're progressing, whether they are feeling confident. Same with the kitchen team. But really, trying to figure out how to progress people throughout the organization, since, the main impetus for growing, for me at least, was to find spaces that my team members could grow into.
Yes.
So a lot of you talked about kind of starting restaurants with this culture. What advice would you have to folks who are in a restaurant that maybe doesn't have a culture and wants to change or implement some of these things, where it might be more challenging than starting from scratch?
I think everybody on this panel has probably been faced with going into a space and having to turn things around. And the unfortunate part is you're going to lose people right away. You have to identify what hill you're willing to die on, and you got to figure out what your standards are. I use culture as the standard. So we start with how we want the place to feel, how we want our team to feel, and then how we want our guests to feel. This is not a shot at anybody who owns a space, but I work really, really hard not to use the word for. No one works for me. Everyone works with me. I don't want a degree of separation. There's not a job in the building that I'm not willing to do, but if I pay you to do it, I'm probably not gonna do it. I'm just telling you the truth. I'll stand side by side with any of my dish members to teach them how to do a job. I'll stand side by side with any cook to teach them how to do a job. But once it is your job, the expectation is that you take the same pride in doing it that I took in training it. That is very important to me. And I use a team-oriented method. So my team actually handles the issues, and I don't handle them so much. If any of you have ever watched a sport in your life, if you've ever drank a beer at a ballpark, if you don't drink, ate peanuts at a ballpark, the lead on that team is not gonna let the slouch continue to be on that team if they don't show up for practice. If you don't put the time in, they weed you out themselves. The manager will never get a chance to have that conversation with you because the team does it. And so you reward people who are doing what you need them to do. There's a beautiful book that's a very short read called The 1 Minute Manager. And it talks about catching people doing things right. In restaurants, we spend a lot of time harping about all the things that people do wrong. And we spend very little time catching someone doing things right. And then, as a result, people start to manage that space. So I'll give you a really quick story. So we do drink quite often because I get a discount on alcohol. And a lot of my guys drink, and if you didn't notice, I was drinking while I was sitting here. I drink. And I consider myself a professional drinker. I've been working at this a long time. That being stated, we had a person who was drinking on the job. First time I ever saw this, actually, and it wasn't that long ago. They were drinking on the job, but they were bringing their own alcohol. And so first, we really criticized them on their poor choice of alcohol. Because if I was going to drink on the job, I would probably take a shot. This person was drinking small bottles of wine. It takes way too long, ABV is too low. It takes way too long to get a buzz. So you're just getting yourself in a situation to get caught, right? And we did that in a very comedic way, but then nobody could drink. And the team was not happy about that. Not because they love alcohol so much, because a privilege was at risk based on someone else's performance. And we went, first month, someone said, "Chef, when are you going to allow us to have our shifty again?" And I said, as soon as somebody apologizes for having alcohol. Now we knew who it was, and we had already cracked the jokes, but the person had not owned their mistake. And again, when I cook a steak to the right temperature, and you tell me that steak is the wrong temperature, I give you a new steak. I gotta pay for that steak, I gotta pay for the last steak, I gotta go through all these processes. God forbid it's a food writer, right? And then there may be a write-up that says Eric Williams, as if I personally cooked that damn steak when somebody else cooked it, right? So I have to own every mistake that happens in the building. I can't work with a team that won't own their mistakes. That's the culture. Ownership.
Fantastic, a great place to end.